Dear Mr. President, I don't know if the winner of the 2024 presidential election is going to be Joe Biden, or if it's going to be former President Donald Trump, or if it's going to be Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Could be someone we don't expect, someone like Nikki Haley, or Vivek Ramaswamy, or even Mike Pence is putting his hat in the ring, along with former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. A number of possibilities for who is going to be elected as the 47th President of the United States. But regardless of whoever sits in the Oval Office, regardless of whoever is inaugurated in January of 2025, I have a message for you. The message for you is it's time to rebuild the wall. It's time to rebuild the wall. It is absolutely undeniable that our nation is vulnerable. It is absolutely undeniable that our nation is susceptible to a host of nefarious and sinister schemes and plots. We thought that our nation was vulnerable when it was attacked by terrorists back in 2001. We thought that when the plane struck the towers, that meant that our nation was vulnerable at that point in time. This nation was sent reeling during that time, and we are still feeling the effects of those attacks even now, 22 years later. I want to suggest to you that just as much as our nation was presumed to be vulnerable after the attacks of 9/11, our nation is also vulnerable right now. With our border currently being open, we have absolutely no idea what could be coming across the border into this country. I want to make it very clear that I do believe there are genuine and sincere people who are looking to cross over the border and enter into our country in the pursuit of the American dream. After all, why shouldn't people who, although they weren't born here, not get to experience the American dream? How many of our businesses and industries would fold and go under if not for immigrants who came over into our country years ago and helped keep our businesses running? I'm convinced that there are genuine and there are good people at our border who are genuinely looking for a chance to pursue the American dream and to pursue a better life for themselves, their wives, their children, and their families. With that being said, however, I want to make it very clear that there are a host of nefarious and sinister individuals at our border right now who are seeking to infiltrate it, who are seeking to come against our nation in an unprecedented way. With Title 42 having recently expired, we find ourselves in a place where anyone could potentially come into our border, and anyone and everyone could potentially be a threat. At the border of our country, the border between the United States and Mexico, there are a host of evils that are being brought into our country. From the drug cartels bringing in fentanyl that is killing people en masse in our country, to child trafficking, to sex trafficking. If there was ever a foreign nation that wanted to infiltrate our border, not by launching weapons against it, but by actually implanting their own citizens in our country, the time is now. It is absolutely unmistakable that the wall of our nation has been broken down. The wall of our nation is broken down. During the previous administration and during the previous presidency, one of the greatest campaign slogans, one of the greatest promises was building the wall, finishing the wall. And not only this, but making the Mexican government, making the country of Mexico actually pay for the wall. We know that there is even violence that can cross over into this nation even as we see countless acts of violence that are perpetrated in our country by people who have crossed into our nation illegally. There is absolutely no denying the fact that our nation can be destroyed from within simply because there aren't policies in place that safeguard and protect the American citizens. With this being said, I want to challenge whoever becomes the next president of the United States to work diligently and to work tirelessly to build the wall, to secure our nation, to preserve the border of our nation, to preserve the American citizens. With that being said, I do not deny that there are people who come from other countries who don't deserve a chance to pursue the American dream and to live a better life than what they have. A lot of people are fleeing from drug cartels. A lot of people are fleeing from violence. A lot of people are fleeing from poverty and a host of other evils in their country. And America is the logical place for them to come to escape that. I am convinced and I firmly believe that there are a number of men and women who are at our border right now who genuinely have sincere hearts, who are good people, who are decent people, who would be hardworking people and would help contribute to our economy. I do not believe that everybody at our border is evil. I do not believe that everybody at our border is wicked. I do not believe that everybody at our border is sinister in their motives and in their intentions. But having said that, I believe that we need to safeguard our border. One of the greatest threats to our country in recent years is related to public health. There was no understanding of whether or not individuals who were crossing over our border and entering into our country could be bringing any type of disease or infection. We spent the better part of 2 years in a public health emergency, and where people were actually forced to isolate themselves and quarantine themselves and even inoculate themselves in order to protect others. And in the midst of all of that, we find ourselves in a position where our border is open and we do not know what people could be bringing in to our country as they cross over to our border. From those who are considered gotaways to those who are willingly and intentionally released into our country, we know that our border right now is strapped. We know that there are states that are sending National Guard, that are sending troops to our border to help the overextended border patrol at our southern border. There is no denying the fact that there is a great crisis at our border. And when I speak about building the wall, I'm not necessarily speaking of a physical wall, but I am speaking also of a figurative wall. A wall of protection, a wall of safety, a wall of security, a wall that guarantees that those who would desire to enter into our country are going to benefit this country rather than hurt and harm this country. We've seen far too many instances of those who have crossed over into our borders who have hurt and harmed and even killed people in this country. This is one of the greatest political debates, and I'm convinced that when it comes to the 2024 presidential election, this is going to be a hot topic. This is going to be a hot button. And I want to challenge you, Mr. President, or Madam President, if it should happen to be a female. I want to challenge you to build the wall, to do better at protecting our nation, to secure the borders of our nation. I do believe that our enemies do not need to come against us with tanks, with weapons, with airplanes, with battleships, with submarines, with nukes. Our enemies can come against us simply by sending in their citizens into our borders undetected. Look at what happened 22 years ago when planes struck the towers in New York City. These were individuals who came into our nation and who were largely undetected. I'm convinced that there needs to be a great screening process that needs to take place within our country to ensure the safety of our citizens, to ensure the safety of our land, to ensure the safety of our nation. With all of that being said, I want to talk to you real briefly about an instance in the Bible when another wall was broken down. We know the story of Nehemiah, who was the king's cupbearer. And we know that Nehemiah was burdened with something very specific. He was burdened with something that he felt obligated and responsible to actually take care of himself. And if you study the Old Testament book of Nehemiah, you will find that he was a man who decided to thrust himself into a position where he would rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. The wall of Jerusalem, the gate of Jerusalem, the doors within the gates, they were all burned with fire. They were all reduced to rubble and ruin. And in the days of Nehemiah, we find that Jerusalem lie in ruin. Babylon had come in and they had made a breach in the wall. They had burned houses with fire. They had burned the temple to the ground. They had burned the gates with fire. And for 70 years, the city of Jerusalem, together with its walls and its gates, were completely destroyed and lie in ruin. No protection whatsoever. And we find Nehemiah rising up to the occasion and doing what he could to not only rebuild the wall, but to repair the gates. And so I want to talk to you about this. And Mr. President or Madam President, I want to encourage you from the life of Nehemiah to rise up and to be that individual who not only rebuilds the wall in this country, but who also repairs the gates. And by gates, I mean access points. By gates, I mean entrances into our country. By gates, I mean those places where people could enter into our country, whether it be via the airspace and on airplanes, or whether it be in our ports and in our docks with ships, or whether it be even at the northern border of our country, which doesn't get as much attention, the border between the United States and Canada. Our nation right now is incredibly susceptible, and the city of Jerusalem and those who dwelt within the city were also susceptible. They were susceptible to the attacks of the enemy. And I want to challenge you from the book of Nehemiah to rise up and to accept the responsibility and the challenge to rebuild the wall and to repair the gates to ensure the safety of the citizens of this country. In the Old Testament book of Nehemiah, beginning with the first chapter, we find the walls were broken down. We find the walls were broken down, and we find the gates were burned with fire. Consider, if you will, the following words, beginning with the first verse of the first chapter. The words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah. It came to pass in the month of Chislev, in the 20th year, as I was in Shushan the citadel, that Hanani, one of my brethren, came with men from Judah, and I asked them concerning the Jews who had escaped, who had survived their captivity, and concerning Jerusalem. Listen to these words. And they said to me, the survivors who are left from the captivity in the province are there in great distress and reproach. Pay attention to that. Great distress and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem is also broken down, and its gates are burned with fire. Great distress and reproach on the one hand, the wall of the city broken down, and the gates are burned with fire. In the second chapter of the same book, beginning with the first verse, we find the following words. And it came to pass in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, that I took the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had never been sad in his presence before. Therefore the king said to me, why is your face sad, since you are not sick? This is nothing but sorrow of heart. So I became dreadfully afraid and said to the king, "May the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my father's tombs, lies waste and its gates are burned with fire?" Continuing on in that same chapter, beginning with verse 7. "Furthermore, I, being Nehemiah, said to the king, If it please the king, let letters be given to me for the governors of the region beyond the river," that's the river Euphrates, "that they must permit me to pass through till I come to Judah, and a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he must give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel, which pertains to the temple, for the city wall, and for the house that I will occupy. And the king granted them to me according to the good hand of my God upon me." We cannot miss what is emphasized and what is expressed in these opening verses in the first two chapters of the book of Nehemiah, because we find the inhabitants, those who had survived captivity, those who had survived oppression, those who had come out of 70 years of captivity and slavery and bondage. They were in great distress and great turmoil because the wall of the city was broken down and the gates were burned with fire. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Suffice it to say that there are many in our nation and many in our country right now who are in the same type of distress, who are in the same type of turmoil, because they look at the condition of our country and they see the tremendous amount of evil and wickedness that is being permitted to enter into our borders. There is absolutely no mistaking the fact that the wall of America has been broken down, and has been broken down for quite some time. Even a Netflix special called Immigration Nation touches on this when it documents the chronicles of individuals who were deported, forcefully taken within the borders of the United States, and removed from family, removed from friends, removed from loved ones, that they would be deported to their own country. This is something that is of great importance and great significance, particularly when we talk about the condition of this nation, because as our borders go, and not only our northern and southern borders, but also our eastern and western borders, the ports of our major cities, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Miami, Boston, New York City, these gateways, these entrances, these places on the border of our country are in shambles, and have been in shambles for quite some time. And whoever sits behind the desk of the Oval Office in 2025 must be that one who safeguards and protects our nation and our country. In the Old Testament book of Nehemiah, if you continue reading in the second chapter, we find that Nehemiah assessed the damage. He obtained what was necessary to return to the land of Judah, to return to the land of his fathers, and we find that the first thing that he did was assess the damage. "So I came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. Then I arose in the night, I and a few men with me. I told no one what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem, nor was there any animal with me except the one on which I rode. And I went out by night through the valley gate to the serpent well and the refuse gate, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem which were broken down, and its gates which were burned with fire. Then I went to the fountain gate and to the king's pool, but there was no room for the animal under me to pass. So I went up in the night by the valley and viewed the wall. Then I turned back and entered by the valley gate, and so returned. And the officials did not know where I had gone or what I had done. I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or the others who did the work." Continuing on in this passage, "Then I said to them, You see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lies waste, and its gates are burned with fire. Come and let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we no longer be a reproach. And I told them of the hand of my God, which had been good upon me, and also of the king's words that he had spoken to me. So they said, let us rise up and build. Then they set their hands to this good work. Notice the words here. You see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lies waste and its gates are burned with fire. There is great distress in our land because of what has been permitted into our country. I've already alluded to it and I've already mentioned it, from the fentanyl that has permeated our country, to the human trafficking that has taken place at our border, to the drug smuggling that has taken place at our border, to the child trafficking, to the sex trafficking. There is a great number of evil that is present at our border. And if I am an enemy of the United States of America, I am going to send as many people as I can into this country via the southern border in order to destroy the nation from within. And we see acts of violence that have been committed in our nation and in our society by those who are wicked, those who are evil, and who come over with nefarious and sinister plots. And I want to make us very aware that there is a duty and a responsibility that we have to make sure that we ensure the safety of our citizens, to ensure the safety of our borders. And we have to do a tremendous job of securing our border. We need to make sure that the Border Patrol agents have all of the tools and the items that they need. We need to make sure that we are continually monitoring and surveilling our nation, and whether or not it means an actual wall is completed and built. I'm not going to say if an actual wall is the end-all solution, but what I am going to say is that I believe that there needs to be a great measure taken to secure this nation. We are living in very dark and dangerous days where World War III could come upon us at any point in time. We even look at what happened overseas when Russia annexed Crimea. We see what happened even when Russia invaded Ukraine. We are even seeing the fact that there is talk about China invading Taiwan. We know that larger and powerful and stronger nations can invade other nations. And I'm convinced that this is what's going to potentially trigger the next world war. And I'm convinced that there are those nations in the world today that will seek to destroy America, not with nuclear weapons, not with submarines, not with battleships, not with airplanes, but by sending their own wicked and evil pawns and puppets into our country to incite great violence and unrest and distress in our country. In the 3rd chapter of the book of Nehemiah, you find the work begins. I recently released a video that I recorded on the island of Oahu called Bolts and Bars. And it essentially documents what we find in the 3rd chapter of how the wall was rebuilt, how the doors were hung with their bolts and bars. And in that video, I talk about the importance of gates and doors and the bolts and bars that are used to control the flow of traffic both in and out of the city. And I related it to us as individuals and how we must control the flow of traffic in and out of our lives, but also of the nation. I would encourage you to watch that video for additional commentary about how and why this is important. But in the book of Nehemiah, we find in the 3rd chapter, the work actually begins. If you keep reading in the book of Nehemiah, you will find that there were those who opposed the work of rebuilding the wall. Notice that the opposition did not come from the people of Judah themselves. It did not come from God's chosen people. The opposition that came to the rebuilding of the wall were those who were brought into the land after the people of God had been removed. There were individuals such as Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arab who were actually vehemently opposed to the work of rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem, rebuilding the gates. And this is what I want to touch on. This is what I want to use to bring this this video to a conclusion because I want us to understand the opposition that has been present in our nation, the opposition that will continue to be present within our nation, and also one of the greatest threats and dangers to this nation. Nehemiah chapter 4, beginning with verse 1. But it so happened when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall that he was furious and very indignant and mocked the Jews. And he spoke before his brethren and the army of Samaria and said, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they fortify themselves? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they complete it in a day? Will they revive the stones from the heaps of rubbish, stones that are burned?" Now Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, "Whatever they build, if even a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall." The same chapter beginning with verse 7. Now it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah the Arab, the Ammonites, and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were being restored and the gaps were beginning to be closed. Pay attention to that. The gaps were beginning to be closed, that they became angry, and all of them conspired together to come and attack Jerusalem and create confusion. Nevertheless, we made our prayer to our God, and because of them we set a watch against them day and night. Then Judah said, "The strength of the laborers is failing, and there is so much rubbish that we are not able to build the wall." And our adversaries said, "They will neither know nor see anything till we come into their midst and kill them and cause the work to cease." So it was when the Jews who dwelt near them came that they told us 10 times, "For whatever place you turn, they will be upon us." I want us to pay very close attention to this because there is and there has been and there will be opposition to securing our borders, to potentially building and completing a wall, to increase the security of our nation. We've witnessed that there are those on both sides of the political spectrum who are in opposition to this. Now, I want to once again make it very clear that it is my personal opinion that not everybody who is at our border is evil. Not everybody at our border is wicked. I'm convinced that there are great opportunities for ministry, for compassion, for love, for affection, for mercy, for hospitality to be displayed at our border. I'm convinced that there are genuine people at our border who need to be received and welcomed by men and women in our country. And I believe that there are men and women in our country who are jaded. They are indifferent. They are numb to the idea of people coming in from other countries. However, we have to consider, I spend a lot of time watching different series and documentaries about even our own citizens who are moving to other countries. People who would like to leave America and find a new life, perhaps even a better life in other countries. And they will move to countries such as Greece or Spain or France or even islands in the Caribbean, to other places of the world. And they go because they are seeking a better life for themselves. So not even us as American citizens are exempt or immune from wanting to leave our country to somehow pursue a better life. There are those in our country who even threaten to leave based on the outcome of the 2016 presidential election. And because of the outcome of the election, they threaten to leave this country. They threaten to move to another country. They threaten to move even to Canada to escape what they believed would be 4 years of tyranny and oppression in this country. And so we have found that a lot of those people are still in this country. A lot of those people have chosen to remain even in spite of that. But I want us to recognize that there are and there will be those who will oppose the building of a wall to securing our border, to ensuring the safety and stability of our citizens. And whoever is elected as the next president of this country I'm convinced that one of the first and greatest tasks that they need to do, that they need to undertake, is securing the border and confronting those who would be in vehement opposition to it. You continue reading in the book of Nehemiah, and you will find that there was not only a need to build the wall, but to defend it from adversaries. And this is something that is very important in our country and in our society today, particularly where we are as it pertains to the southern border, because there is not only a need for the sword, but there is a need for the shield. There is not only a need for the instruments that build the wall, but also the instruments that defend from enemies and adversaries. And whenever anyone takes an oath to serve in our military, they take an oath to protect our nation from enemies, both domestic and abroad. They agree and they take an oath to safeguard this nation from those who would seek to destroy it from within and those who would seek to destroy it from without. And this is one of the things that we find in the book of Nehemiah, because there were not only those adversaries who would come against the work from outside of the people of God, from outside of the city, but there were also those who would oppress the people from within. And it is this concept of oppression from within the wall that I want to leave you with as I close this video out, because I want to talk to you about an enemy that lurks within and how oppression can even come from within our own country. We spend a lot of time talking about those who would oppress our citizens from outside of our borders, but we spend very little time talking about those who oppress the people in our country that are actually citizens of the United States themselves. There is a great and tremendous oppression of our citizens by those who wield a tremendous amount of power, from big banks to big pharma to big tech to even big government. There are countless people who would deliberately and intentionally oppress the people, and there are a lot of people who are feeling this oppression. Just look at the state of California and you will see how many people are leaving that state and they are moving to other states seeking relief from the oppression that is present even within that state itself. There is absolutely no denying the fact that we are being oppressed from within. There are people who are oppressing others. We look at the riots, we look at the violence, we look at the protests, we look at all of these different things that have taken place in our country, and there is absolutely no mistaking the fact that oppression has and does and will continue to come even from within this country and from within our borders. It was what was true in Nehemiah's day, when there were those who would actually enslave others. They would enslave sons and daughters, and we see this taking place in our culture and society today, where our sons and our daughters are being enslaved. If they can't be killed and destroyed before they even enter this world, then they are made to be slaves. They are made to be captives from an early age, even through their adolescent years, through their teenage years, and even their young adult years. And there are countless of our children who are living in a continual and perpetual state of slavery, because there are those who should be protecting them, but who are actually oppressing them, who are actually deceiving them, who are actually committing violent acts against them. Think of all of the rape. Think of all the child molestation. Think about the child trafficking. Think about all of these different things. Think about child abuse. Think about even the violence that takes place in our schools. Look at all of the shootings that have taken place in our schools, and there is absolutely no mistaking the fact that there is a great oppression that is present in our country and in our society today. And this is what they saw in Nehemiah's day, that in the days when the wall was being rebuilt, there was also a danger that lurked within. And I want us to be aware of the fact that while we talk about the dangers that come from outside of our borders, we have to also talk about the dangers that come from within our borders. We have to talk about those in big tech. We have to talk about those in government, both at the state level and at the national level, who would seek to oppress and enslave and afflict the people of this country. We look at all of the different things that have happened over the past few years, and there is absolutely no mistaking the fact that we have been living in a continual state of slavery and affliction and oppression. And it is something that we must recognize and we must understand. We must confront the oppression in this country. We must confront the slavery and the bondage in this country. We must recognize that we are the land of the free and the home of the brave. We must return to being one nation under God. We must get back to our roots. We must recognize that the wall must be rebuilt, and we must recognize that there is a need to return to the principles that are outlined in the Word of God. There is a great need to return to the law of God, to His commands, to His statutes. It's what this nation was founded on. It's what this nation was built upon. And it's something that we need to acknowledge wholeheartedly within our lives. In the book of Nehemiah, you will find that after the wall was rebuilt, after the gates were rebuilt, there was a national return to the law. There was a reading of the law. They brought in Ezra the scribe and the priest to read the law and to teach the people, because it wasn't enough for the wall to be rebuilt. It wasn't enough for the gates to be reestablished. It wasn't enough for this safety and security, but there was also a need to actually know and understand and abide and live by the principles that were outlined in the law. You find this in Nehemiah 8. Now all the people gathered together as one man in the open square that was in front of the water gate. And they told Ezra the scribe to bring the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had commanded Israel. So Ezra the priest brought the law before the assembly of men and women and all who could hear with understanding on the first day of the 7th month. Then he read it in front of them in the open square that was in front of the water gate from morning until midday, before the men and the women and those who could understand. And the ears of all the people were attentive to the book of the law. I want to challenge us, and I want to encourage you who would watch this video to be men and women who read, who study, who understand, who obey the principles, the commands, and the statutes that are in the law of God, that are in the Word of God. There must be a national return to prayer. There must be a national return to the Bible. There must be a national return to Judeo-Christian values and principles. And we must recognize the words that God spoke to Solomon at the dedication of the temple, when he said, "If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, I will forgive their sin and heal their land." And we are in need of national forgiveness and national healing. We are in need of those who would rise up as the protectors and the guardians of this country, who will not give themselves over to bribes, who will not give themselves over to the oppression of our people. And there are agencies in our country right now who should, instead of upholding the law and instead of protecting the citizens, are actually oppressing our people, and who are actually operating outside of it. And these things ought not to be so. We must be able to trust those who carry the sword and the shield, those who carry badges. We must be able to trust them with our safety and our security. And I would issue a challenge to anyone who carries any type of badge in this country to be a man or a woman of honor, a man or a woman of integrity, a man or a woman who remembers the oath that you swore to uphold the Constitution and to protect the people of this great nation. and we will find ourselves in a great position where we see this country begin to thrive once again. I hope this video has challenged you. I hope it has stirred you. I hope that you have found relevance in this video, and I hope that it encourages you to go out and to make a difference and to truly do something that will change and impact the lives of countless people. Thanks so much for tuning in. God bless, and I'll see you next time.